The planning commission meeting for January 28th will now come to order at 6:04. Let's please stand for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Okay. Roll call. I am Commissioner Rank. Okay. We're gonna go, sorry, do we need to go in order? Oh, no, okay. So, position one would be Commissioner Srivastava. Yep, did I get that perfectly? Yes. Thank you. Commissioner Ali,
I'm present.
Commissioner Matuba,
I'm here.
Commissioner Matubatu,
There you go. Yeah.
Commissioner Chapel,
I am here.
Commissioner Grant, myself, Commissioner Erickson Brown,
Present.
Commissioner Taylor.
Present. I'm gonna move because I need to charge.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have to sit in this quietly.
It's over here.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. Plagued by a lot of.
Okay, so approval of the agenda here. Is there a motion approving tonight's planning commission agenda?
I'll move.
Is there a second? Perfect. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Is there anything for the good of the order?
I actually have a question about if I know I'm gonna be absent. Is this an appropriate time to say that? Or should I just email you?
No, I mean, you can go ahead and say it just to let your fellow commissioners know.
First meeting of February.
All right, we are going to move on to the approval of minutes. The minutes from January 14th have been drafted and are included in the Planning Commission's packet. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Do we have a motion to approve?
This is Commissioner Chapel, so moved.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Yes. Hi.
The motion passes. Do we have any announcements this evening for the Planning Commission?
We do have just a couple quick announcements. Just pull those up here. And actually, you know what? These are so quick, I won't even put the slide up. We just wanted to kind of call out that we haven't gotten you all of the training materials we're planning to get you just yet. We're just waiting for everyone to have the tech and email set up. But by the end of this week, you should be receiving an email with all of the training materials in there for you. We will also have links for some of the required trainings in there. So just look out for an email from us. Yes, I think everyone should be able to set up their city emails now. If you are having any issues, just let myself or Troy know so that we can make sure that we're sending you the information maybe via your personal email until it gets set up. So.
And those are like the public records training and stuff like that.
Yeah, so there's, let's see, there's one that's, let's see, planning related, training, and then I want to say the other one is open public records.
Yeah.
Is that right, Troy?
Yeah, so there's the OPMA training, which is the Public Records Act, and then there's the training for local planning, and that's where you'll kind of learn the law structure, format behind planning in Washington State. So, but yeah, those are the two most important trainings to get done. And just a quick reminder, you'll have a certificate that you can print out and sign. And once you do that, we just ask that you can email those to us in PDF format would be great. And then we'll get those certifications into our system, filed away, and then we'll be covered. So those are required by state law. So anyway, those are the two trainings. The other stuff you can go through kind of at your own pace. In the packet, there's a lot of information. There's a lot of stuff, so it may seem overwhelming, but just take your time with it, have fun, peruse it, all that sort of good stuff. It's just good to kind of help build your knowledge base over time. So,
And on top of those kind of online trainings, there is an in-person training for you and city council on March 14th from 8:30 to 1:30 here in the visitor center. We'll make sure that you have the reminder emails. Some of you may have received a reminder email from John already, but yeah, again, I think with some of the emails not being set up, we'll make sure you have that information. And thereafter than that, you confirm attendance by February 13th. So we will make sure you're kind of aware of the deadline as it's coming up. And then, yeah, we just also can call out that our department's in the midst of interviewing for the community economic development director. So that's in progress, and we'll let you know when we have any updates. And yeah, that is all the announcements that I have today.
Exciting. Okay, public comments here. We don't have any public comments here because we do not have the public here.
Looks like we do have one. We have a Zoom user online. I don't know if that's someone from the public or if that's someone who's using two different devices, but yeah.
So did the city receive any public comments to be provided to Planning Commission
No,
over tonight's agenda?
we did not.
All right. So we will go through the legislative public script. I may condense some of this information here because the public is not here. But how many are new? Like new? Yeah, okay. So
I consider myself new.
okay. Same with me. So if, I guess in the future, we probably won't have to go through this again because, well, if the public's not here, we won't have to go through this again, but I did want to run through this just because it's my first time. And since we have the majority of the commission that's new. So and just to ask you, Maddie, too, this is really only just kind of, well, I guess this is for tonight's stuff.
Yes.
Correct there.
Yes, we definitely want to open the hearing. We do potentially have one member of the public online, but members of the public online can't provide testimony. It's just in person. So if you want to skip some of the kind of procedures for public comment, you can abbreviate. But yeah, the rest of the script you'll want to follow.
Okay, so the public hearing for Planning Commission Agenda Bill 26-2 Co-Living Housing and Residential Parking Code Amendments is now open at 6:14. I'll now go over the rules of order for this hearing. The general rules of order are as follows. Only one person shall speak at a time. Any interruptions of the person speaking by planning commissioner or staff member shall be consistent with Robert's rules of order. So testimony provided by the public is subject to the following. Those wishing to provide public testimony must be present in the meeting. Those attending remotely are not permitted to provide oral testimony. However, anyone may submit written testimony from the date of advertisement of the hearing until the close of the public hearing. Opportunity to provide oral and written testimony will be given in the order of those signed in on the register. Afterwards, opportunity will be provided to those who did not get a chance to sign up to provide testimony. Anyone providing written testimony shall provide copies to the chair for distribution to the commission and staff. Written testimony can be provided in addition to oral testimony by the same person. Those providing testimony shall provide testimony from the podium unless other accommodations are needed. Each speaker must begin by clearly stating their first and last name, place of residence, and if applicable, the organization they're representing. City staff and planning commissioners will not engage in dialogue with the individual providing testimony. If questions are asked by the public, staff may respond after all public testimony is received. Individuals may speak for 3 consecutive minutes or less. An individual speaking on behalf of a group or organization may speak for 5 consecutive minutes in lieu of other members of the group or organization speaking. Time cannot be donated by one speaker to another. Comments should be related to the subject matter at hand. The public has the right to make critical or harsh remarks during their testimony. However, any person making disruptive sounds, including booing, hissing, clapping, or other disruptive sounds, while another individual has the floor, or slanderous, threatening remarks while addressing the planning commission or at any time during the hearing shall be asked to leave by the chair and barred from further audience before the planning commission at that meeting. I'll now proceed with the order of operations for this hearing. The purposes of this legislative public hearing is to obtain public input and for the planning commission to provide the city council with a recommendation regarding the co-living housing and residential parking code amendments. The staff and recommendation along with the associated exhibits for this hearing are provided in the planning commission packet and available at the city's website. If we had an order, it would be as follows. First, city staff and public testimony, and then any staff responses and or additional statements and questions from commissioners. We will now hear from Maddie Lawrenson, Associate Planner, who will provide us with the hearing presentation.
All right, thank you. And some of this will be repetitive from the last meeting, but just want to make sure that y'all understand the proposed updates and just make sure that there are no questions before a recommendation to City Council is made. Okay, and so as a reminder, these updates are coming directly out of state requirements. So 2 different bills were passed in 2024 requiring these updates. So House Bill 1998 and Senate Bill 6015, and they're codified in the revised Code of Washington. And we looked to the RCW sections to draft our code amendment. All right, and as a reminder, so co-living housing is a residential development with sleeping units that are independently rented and lockable and that provide living and sleeping space. Residents do share kitchen facilities with other sleeping units. And co-living housing doesn't refer to assisted living facilities, adult family homes, or community residential facilities. Those are separate uses. And thinking about co-living housing as a typical apartment building, but that contains smaller kind of micro units and shared community spaces is a good way of thinking about it. It is pretty similar to kind of a dorm situation, except for it would be associated with an educational facility. And we also have a associated definition of sleeping unit, and that differentiates these units in co-living housing from a typical a dwelling unit, which would be, for example, say a bedroom in a single family home. Outside of co-living housing, all of the units that are in other types of housing are going to be called dwelling units. But this is a differentiation specific to the co-living housing use. And I'll just say both of those definitions are coming, well, co-living housing definitions coming straight out of RCW. I want to say the sleeping unit definition is coming from building code. Okay, and then also as a reminder, the highlighted zones in the red boxes are the ones where we are now proposing to allow co-living housing uses. And those zones are all the zones where multifamily housing, multifamily dwelling units are already allowed. So what that means is nothing is changing kind of regarding the development regulations, the development standards as far as heights, building coverage, setback. So none of kind of how the building appears from the outside is changing. It's simply we are allowing a use and allowing kind of a different configuration of housing in these zones. Again, based on state statute, but also just because this type of housing can be much more affordable, and it just allows for a lot more flexibility. And all that to say, I will also mention that, you know, whether anyone ever constructs co-living housing in these zones is dependent on the market. It's hard to know if there would ever be a market for units this small. Here in Duvall, you know, there's not a whole lot of public transportation to and from the city. So keeping that in mind, this is allowing a new type of use, but hard to say if it'll ever end up, you know, being constructed. And yeah, here are just a couple of examples of co-living housing buildings in other cities. So the one on the top right corner is in Redmond, and the other two are in Seattle. Any you know, co-living housing, just like any other multifamily housing development, would need to follow our design guidelines. So again, we're not changing anything about kind of the external aesthetic appearance. We're just changing the interior, the allowance for interior setup, basically. Okay, and then I just wanted to pull a couple of sections from the code updates just to kind of help you orient to the actual updates within the code. You all should have all of this in your packet already and hopefully reviewed. But hopefully this will just orient you a little bit more. So I've just pulled our R12 zoning district, where we are adding co-living housing as a permitted use. And you can see down in letter H, dwelling unit multifamily is also a permitted use, which is why we are adding co-living housing in this zoning district. And then on the right side, you can see the Midtown zoning district. And you'll notice that in letter F, we allow dwelling units on upper floors currently. So we're also allowing co-living housing on upper floors. All right, and then here's an example of our development standards. These development standards are found in each zoning district as well. And as you'll see, we are adding a superscript for minimum density and maximum density. Because one of the requirements of the RCW is that a sleeping unit in co-living housing shall be counted as 1/4 of the dwelling unit for purposes of calculating density. So we do have to add on that specification to the development standards. Okay, and then I just pulled a couple of sections from the parking updates as well. So letter H here is a new section in our parking standards. And this language mirrors almost exactly what's in the revised Code of Washington. So when calculating minimum off-street parking requirements for residential development, following parking requirements apply. 1, parking may be enclosed or unenclosed. 2, tandem parking spaces are permitted to meet minimum off-street parking requirements at a rate of 1 space for every 20 linear feet. Basically saying tandem parking is allowed. Up to a minimum of 6 parking spaces in a legally non-conforming gravel surface parking area shall count toward minimum required off-street parking. This is fairly specific, but it's, you know, word for word what's in the revised Code of Washington. And then number 4 is talking about when perhaps parking requirements and tree retention are in conflict with each other. And it is saying that basically tree retention is more important in the long run than the off-street parking requirement, but it's on the responsibility of the applicant to prove that you know, it's infeasible to add that off-street parking without tree removal. So not sure if I'm explaining that quite clearly, so make sure if you have questions you can ask me afterwards. But again, all of this language is standard from the revised Code of Washington. We are just basically doing the bare minimum to make sure that our code is compliant with the state standards. Okay, and then another example here is our off-street parking area design standards. So this table already exists within our code, and these dimensions have to do with both residential and non-residential development right now. So because the requirements of RCW only relate to residential parking, we just added a couple of superscripts clarifying that for residential parking stalls, the dimensional standards are a little bit different. The minimum is going to be 8 by 20 versus 9 by 20. So not too much different there, but just have to add those call outs. Okay, and then just a kind of high level overview of the proposed amendments. So the zoning districts that are being amended are 1414 through 1428, and that includes the R12, R20, MU12, MUI, MT, OT, UT1, and the O zones. And you just kind of saw what that looked like in the first couple of slides. We are also adding definitions of co-living housing, sleeping units, dormitory, and tandem parking. Dormitory and tandem parking are basically just kind of clarifying updates because we did not have definitions of tandem parking or dormitories. In dormitories, we are defining as co-living housing that is connected to an educational institution. Okay, and then lastly, lastly, we are also updating our parking standards and design, which you saw a couple of sections there on the screen just now, and amending very simply to conform to RCW 3670A 622. All right, and we ran through this timeline last time, but just to kind of make sure that we understand all the boxes have been checked. We of course drafted code, staff reviewed, we submitted to the Department of Commerce for 60-day review, which we need to do with any code updates we're making, so that they can provide us feedback. We didn't receive any, well, actually, we did receive feedback the first round that we submitted, and we did talk with the Department of Commerce about the comments that we received. And so no concerns there. Let's see, we submitted a SEPA checklist and did the associated noticing for that SEPA determination. It was a determination of non-significance. There was also an associated comment period with that determination. And that comment period is up. And of course, there's been planning commission and city council review. The public hearing is occurring here today, and there will be another public hearing with city council next week. Based on our code currently, we do need to have 2 public hearings, one before the planning commission and one before city council for code amendments. And then we will have a recommendation from the planning commission, ideally tonight. That's on the agenda. You know, if there's ever a time where you wanted more information and don't feel like you can make a decision, you as the planning commission can decide when you're going to make that recommendation. But typically we do, if we feel like we have enough information, we do batch the public hearing with a recommendation all in the same meeting. And that is all I have. Do you have any questions? And I will say we can also, you can have more additional discussion after the close of the public hearing before you make a recommendation. So it's kind of up to you as far as when you want to open it up for discussion.
We don't have any public here, so, you know, no public comments. The zoning districts that are designated for this, those came from the state, and are they consistent with, you know, the zoning districts that are in others? I know there's sometimes definitions of zoning districts that go from city to city, and they could be a little bit different, but was there a reason why they can't be put in a residential 4.5, 6, 12, or not the lighter density?
Yeah, so the guidance from the state was that co-living housing needs to be allowed wherever multifamily housing is allowed. And basically the easiest way, so to back up a little bit, so their guidance is you need to allow co-living housing wherever 6 or more multifamily units are allowed. But that gets really complicated because the number of units depends on the size of the lots as well as the zoning district. So if we were kind of going off of the letter of the RCW, it would get pretty complicated. So we said, let's make it easy. Let's just allow co-living housing wherever any multifamily units are allowed, even if it's maybe below that number. So that's where we're getting the amendments to the zoning districts. And then to your question about the lower density residential zones, there could be something similar to co-living housing via, for example, a homeowner renting out rooms in their home, but that wouldn't be considered co-living housing because that would be that would consist of dwelling units. And our sleeping unit definition differentiates between sleeping units and dwelling units. And the purpose of co-living as that use, co-living housing is typically looks more like an apartment complex. It's kind of on par with the multifamily. That makes sense.
And so architectural standards would be different for that kind of building as opposed to trying to find something in Old Town, you know, residential district.
So, I mean, each district has, different dimensional development standards. But those aren't, except for the call outs around density, those aren't changing. As far as the architectural elements, that doesn't really factor into this. Things. I don't know if I'm quite saying.
The building's gonna look different, you know, you can't plop down an apartment building in the middle of a row of Cape Cod houses. Which,
Correct. Yes, because we're not changing the development standards. We're not changing, for example, the maximum heights in these zones. Yes, it's purely related to the use. Yeah.
okay. We will not be calling on the public to speak because there is no public here. Does any other staff wish to respond to any statements or questions asked?
I got one. Have we done the 0.25, the density ratio? Do we have enough assessment for the sewer, water? Can you hear me?
So, yes, yeah, thanks for your question. So there is also a kind of connected requirement that the sewer fees, I want to say it's the sewer fees, are calculated at a specific rate. So we're working with the Public Works Department on that specific requirement. That will involve updating the fee schedule, if I'm not mistaken.
Sure. So Steve Leonard, Steve Public Works. And just to kind of maybe answer your question a little differently too, the number of rooms in a house aren't necessarily changing, just who can use them, right? So the capacity wouldn't be affected by co-living per se. It's the same style of footprint of house. It just has, you living with someone else together. So yeah, there's not an issue there. However, the utility billing within the domicile itself is going to be up to the property owner. However, they would prorate their share or include it in their rent or whatever. It won't be the city's business. So that would just be, once it hits the meter and goes into the home, it's the homeowner's.
But I think there was
manage.
in a code that you cannot consider it as a half unit.
Sure.
So yeah, there is one requirement that the city may not treat a sleeping unit in co-living housing as more than a half of a dwelling unit for purposes of calculating fees for sewer connection. We have worked already a little bit with Public Works. I think we were working with Larissa on that to make sure that is implemented as well. That is outside of Title 14, which is where the rest of the updates are happening. But yes, we're working with Public Works Department to implement that piece.
Copy. Thank you. Along the lines, second quick question is, are the parking spaces also 0.25 per? How would that be possible if that's the case?
Yes. So let me just flip this section as well. So we cannot require more than a quarter of a parking space per sleeping unit. So if there are, for example, 4 sleeping units in the co-living development, usually there'd be more than 4, but just using that as an example, we would only be able to require 1 parking space. So yes, it's a pretty small amount. Again, it's up to the market. So this is us setting the minimum, and that's coming from the state. So we can't really do anything different. But we're setting the minimum, and then if the developer determines that there is a need for more parking, they can propose more parking. We're just setting the minimum standard. And again, this co-living housing is typically seen in more denser urban areas where there is a lot of transit. and public transportation service. And so I think that's what, you know, the legislators who created this code were getting at. They wanted to, incentivize kind of lower parking counts, with the assumption that, you know, a lot of these co-living housing developments are going in areas where there's much more public transportation.
Don't want to take too much time, but yeah. So city council, you guys, city planners are recommending based on future forecasts that Duvall will be seeing that kind of, transit infrastructure, and this recommendation is coming from that aspect, right? Am I understanding it right?
So
So like,
we
Mhm.
yeah,
Go
so we as a city are not necessarily forecasting that. We are simply following what the state is telling us to do. So the state has kind of what's written in RCW applies across the board for you know, cities and counties kind of across the state. And so it's not necessarily a reflection of what we think we'll see in the city over time. We are just trying to meet state statutes is what it comes down to. And you know, if eventually there is more public transportation and a developer comes in and says, okay, I'm in, you know, for example, the Midtown or Old Town or, you know, any of the zones where multifamily housing is allowed, and they say, you know, I want to configure the housing so that there are smaller units and shared communal spaces, and I want to look at co-living housing. You know, that would be just fine. And they would kind of determine, okay, what's the minimum parking required, and do we want to, you know, construct more parking than is actually required based on demand that we think there will be. But that's kind of all up to the market forces. And we are with this one just kind of trying to meet the basic state requirements is what it comes down to. Yeah. And you know, a lot of times with these requirements, you know, people might be thinking more about larger cities than small ones, and so that's, you know, probably somewhat of what has happened here. We're just doing the work to make sure that we're meeting the standards.
Got it. Thank you. How are we going to make sure that design quality is like not dorm style or like, you know, it's a single unit, the way it's proposed?
Sorry, would you repeat the question?
Yeah, so 0.25 sleeping unit, the one that you propose is an independent unit. It's not, do we have any checks that make sure it's not like a different style like dorm instead of a apartment, but shared kitchen? You know what I'm saying? Like
So
it's yeah.
So I mean if someone were proposing co-living housing, that is what it would look like. It'd be small units with shared kitchen facilities. All of the all buildings are regulated by the building code, and we have, you know, our building team who would be reviewing those applications and those building permits and making sure that, you know, they're meeting the building code side. I hope I'm answering your question. I don't know if I'm quite
Okay.
getting at it, but
We're not changing the element of what houses or buildings look like per the code. The code's still as strong as it was before, so the look and feel of the code is intact. These are just pieces that are inside the structure that the code will still guide the exterior of without changing to keep its current themed kind of Duvall character.
yeah, design guidelines. I mean, separately, there will be a design guideline update, but our design guidelines aren't changing with this code amendment.
Hi, I have a question. So, I know that like in 2014 or 15, there was a similar apartment built in Seattle, and there was a huge public backlash. So, what were the reasons for that, and have we considered that and learned from that while we implement that here in the city?
Yeah, so I do think there's been quite a bit of back and forth in Seattle over time. I honestly don't know the details and the ins and outs of that particular kind of controversy. But I think what has happened is the people making these decisions on the state level have said, we've seen that co-living housing actually does work as a use in Seattle, because I mean Seattle has most of the examples currently. And they're saying, yeah, we actually think that cities should allow this type of use, and developers should have more kind of leeway to configure units to be fairly small and to allow these shared kitchen and communal facilities. So the legislators are looking at examples in places like Seattle and saying, oh, this actually works. And I think that we need to kind of step in and say that this is something we want to champion. So that's my understanding.
There's a report attached to from the State Department of Commerce that I thought actually had a lot of great information about like what these can look like. I think I was living in Seattle at the time that those apartments went in, and it was like, yeah, some neighbors were really upset about it, but essentially it was a conforming use, and they were like, and they all were rented, and people were like, great, a cheap place to live. So yeah, I think, I don't know, yeah.
There were no parking requirements.
There were no park, but Seattle has a lot of different, like they don't have a lot of park, yeah, because cities can do that. They don't have to require park.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And on the same topic, like, do we, what do you think about like the management or upkeep of the shared spaces? I mean, spaces like who would be responsible for that?
Yeah, so that would be a question for the property manager. It's just like any apartment. So I mean, even apartments that aren't these co-living housing developments, there are going to be some shared spaces, and that's going to be up to the property manager. Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions from planning commission?
I have a few more. Like, how flexible are we, like, in future if we see something that's not working in updating the code or making changes based on the feedback once the project gets in?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It really depends on where the update is coming from. So these updates are ones that the state has told us, that have to get done within a certain timeline. And so with those types of updates, we really don't have that much flexibility at all. It's just a matter of looking at the guidance and figuring out how it fits into our code and how to put that in there as clearly and efficiently as possible. But there will, and there, it's interesting, over the past couple of years, there have been quite a few bills that have been passed that have to do with housing and land use, and that's pretty kind of new, kind of the amount of updates and requirements coming through for cities it's just a lot of updates currently.
And if I don't mind, I think that this is sort of a national trend where cities and towns for the last 50 years have had a lot of leeway. Like states have been kind of silent on stuff related to zoning, and that's changing, not just in Washington State, but like all over the place. Where states are saying, hey, we have a national crisis in housing. So like the cities aren't going to get their act together individually, no offense. But I mean, the message is the state saying we've got to intervene on a more like statewide level to make sure that there's enough housing to meet the need and address on house crisis and all this stuff. So Yeah, that's what I think is the context for a lot of this, and the fact that there's so many of them,
Yeah.
and more coming with the legislative session happening now.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, for example, we also just updated our accessory dwelling unit code to allow 2 ADUs per lot. And that also came from direction from the state. And yeah, so we're just working on making sure that we're compliant.
Maddie,
Eventually,
I can add a little bit to that.
yes.
So yeah, so in its essence, if we discover, certain requirements aren't too feasible, they're causing havoc. For example, the one parking spot per, 1/4 of a parking spot per rental unit within the co-housing. Say, for instance, that creates a problem, right? Our recourse as a small city, as a small town, is essentially to advocate with our legislative team, also with other cities within Washington's Association of Washington Cities, where we can bring up those topics and those issues, where we can say, hey, this state mandate that limits our ability to require parking for these co-housing facilities or homes isn't sufficient, and we need more because we're kind of in a rural area, where we don't have the public transit, and so we need to require, our recommendation would be, hey, we need to require 1 space per rental room, realistically, or something like that. So, our recourse in those instances when these state mandates don't work is to advocate with our partners and legislative body for what the proposed changes that we need to have happen at the state level. And that, of course, takes time. It's much easier and quicker to fix things on a local level than have to go all the way back up to the state. But that's essentially our only kind of recourse, is to, again, advocate and provide that feedback to the state. So I just wanted to throw that in there on that.
Yeah, thanks. And I will also say that we will have code amendments that come through the planning commission that perhaps are not ones that are mandated, but are ones that we see that we just need to be updated. And there is a lot more flexibility when that's coming from the city versus coming from the state requirement. So yeah, ideally you get to see those updates as well, and you have some more kind of flexibility to take a look at them and say, you think something needs to change.
Maddie, you can change standards fairly routinely. It's not like a once-a-year thing.
Exactly.
You can always develop, change, add, and manage.
Yeah, and we have a whole list of code updates that need to get done eventually, and we're just kind of working through the list and working through kind of figuring out which ones are the most important. Which ones we can devote time to. For example, we are going to have a consultant working on our design, updating our design guidelines, moving them from guidelines to design standards. That is also a state requirement. And so that'll be in the works as well. But there may be more opportunity within that process. I don't quite know what that process will look like, but there may be some opportunities where a consultant comes and presents to the planning commission and kind of helps you have some more say over the process as it's happening. So it kind of just depends on the topic. And yeah.
Okay. Any other questions from the commission?
My next question was like the same with parking. Like, do we have some data about how much parking space is needed by a co-living unit?
Yes, I mean, so I am assuming that there was some amount of research that went into this bill that was passed. I don't have all of the background on that. Again, I do think they are just typically, they're assuming that co-living housing is gonna be constructed where,
Or they're the bus.
yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe if someone's choosing to live in co-living, a co-living situation, it's because they want to bring down their costs. Maybe they don't want to own a car either, you know? So, that's probably the thought process behind it, and, yeah, we're rolling with it, so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would add that the unfortunate part is often there isn't the research done into some of those numbers, those arbitrary standard, the standards that come out. So they are, I would say, somewhat arbitrary on occasion, which is a bit unfortunate. But that's sometimes how it rolls, and we don't have control over that.
I have a question. Now that we are talking about dwelling units, I mean, all these schools and all that, do we have a plan for, if there is a transportation need, as we are thinking about building these units, if people are coming with thinking that, if I live here, it could be less cost and I have transportation needs, are we having any plan to improve our transportation needs, city schools?
Yeah, that's a
Incentive
good
programs?
question. Yeah, so I mean, we do have a transportation plan that is a part of our comprehensive plan. So that's one piece that helps guide future planning. Also, the Public Works Department, Steve might be able to speak more to this, determines level of service, if I'm not mistaken.
Policy sets a level of service. We just have to make sure it's maintained
Okay.
through modeling and other development management. I think with the stuff going on with the comp plan right now, so we went through the comp plan process. The state wasn't happy with a couple things, but all the other elements along the way, park trails and open space, transportation, they've been updated to the snapshot of activities we have, the community has adopted. However, when we go through the next round of potential comp plan changes based on housing and jobs that we're currently working with PSRC and the state on, we will have to just relook at transportation numbers and reaffirm that any changes made to density and or zoning are reflected in our transportation model. So our levels of services are set by policy. So we just make sure they don't fail. And when they fail, that the applicant who had failed them is fixing them, and or we are building our transportation fee program to fix the deficiencies that are scheduled to be failing us under certain years. A lot of fun reading.
Okay. There being no more further testimony, if anybody else has any other questions, comments?
We can also discuss outside of the public hearing.
Yeah. I will close the public hearing on this matter at 6:58. Design review. No design review. Any other presentations?
Yes. Yes. No.
Critic.
No.
So we will have a presentation on DMC 14.42 critical area regulation status updates. Presentations. ADL Incorporated.
Yes, thank you. That's me. I'm working on sharing my screen right now. Let's see. Bear with me just a second. All right. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Great. Thank you. So I'm Millie-Ann Van Devender. I work for AHBL. We are one of those consulting firms that Maddie was just talking about that comes in and helps with your code updates sometimes. And the one that I'm going to brief you on tonight is the update to your sensitive areas ordinance. And because my understanding is that several of you are new to the Planning Commission, good job volunteering. I'm going to repeat a little bit of information then from what we presented a couple months ago, but I'll try to go through it quickly. So a sensitive area ordinance, or an SAO, just some baseline leveling information. You have 5 sensitive areas in Duvall that are designated: wetlands, geologically hazardous areas or steep slopes, fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas, frequently flooded areas, and critical aquifer recharge areas that are also known as CARAs, C-A-R-A. So the last time Duvall updated the SAO was in 2017. That was also the last time there was a review done of best available science, and I'll get into what that means in a moment. And your sensitive areas regulations are codified in the Duvall Municipal Code, as well as the floodplain regulations have their own chapter. Those were last updated in 2021, the floodplain regulations. So what's required by this update and why are we doing it? So state law, Washington State requires the city to review its SAO in accordance with new best available science and then make updates accordingly. Science, as we know, is an ever-evolving methodology, and new science, new ways to protect these sensitive areas comes out all the time, new research. And so the state says you need to find the latest and greatest best available science and then incorporate that into your regulations of how you're going to protect these critical areas. So just a side note, sensitive areas means the same thing as critical areas. I will probably use the two terms interchangeably. It used to be that everybody in the state of Washington said sensitive areas, and then the state of Washington actually changed it to critical areas at some point, but they don't care if you still want to call it sensitive areas. Duvall has chosen to keep sensitive areas, so on we go. But if I interchange the terms, which I'm going to try not to do, but if I do, just know that it's the same thing. So in order to update with best available science, as well as new rules that come down from the state, the legislature says, oh, here's this new rule on how to protect your critical aquifer recharge areas or whatever. So in order to help with that and to know and catch all of those new rules and new best available science, Department of Commerce came up with a critical areas checklist. It's a technical assistance tool. It lines out the RCWs that are required to be incorporated into your code. And then we, as the planners, go through and check if your code has that information or doesn't have that information. And it gives us a good outline, a good starting point for updating the code. So just catch you up to speed on what's been done so far on this update. This process is spanning over about a 6 to 8 month time frame because there's a lot of information to review and decipher and incorporate and update. So we've completed that commerce review checklist. And then because we are planners, we have a lot of planning knowledge. We've worked on these kinds of codes before. We've updated lots and lots of codes before. We've written brand new codes, and we've reviewed projects also. So being on the planner in-house side of it. So we know codes, we have that knowledge, but we don't have the scientific knowledge. So we brought in, with your permission, the Herrera Environmental Group. So they did the best available science, the BAS review. So they went out and found what the state and what the literature says is the best available science at this moment. So they provided that in a memo that was provided to the Planning Commission, the City Council, and the city earlier in the process, back in November, maybe. So we took the best available science and we updated the code according to that, drafted the updates, and then city staff sent the checklist that we worked on that said what we need to do, sent the proposed code amendments that we had worked on, and sent all of that to interested parties and various agencies that have a stake in it. So commerce and tribes and agencies and city staff sent it out to all the people, came up with the comments, and then we started to incorporate those comments. So the revisions that you have in your packet, I know it's not like, it's pretty dry reading if you attempted it, but you'll notice that there's a lot of red and blue. The red it's all done in track changes, so you can see what changes have been made. So red strikeout is proposed to be deleted and blue is proposed to be added. So a lot of that came from different comments. So the updated SAO requirements will apply to future development permits and proposals once it's adopted and put in place. Will not apply retroactively to past actions, will not require changes to existing land uses or developments that have previously been approved, and will apply in the shoreline jurisdiction after the Shoreline Master Program update is complete, with some adjustments per the state's Shoreline Management Act, if applicable. So the Shoreline Master Program update is a separate entity. It's a separate process for updating your Shoreline Master Program, but the sensitive areas ordinance overlaps with it. So they work together, they team up. And so when your SMP, your Shoreline Master Program is updated, it will incorporate a lot of the information that we're updating now. So let's talk about best available science. So the state says critical areas must be designated and protected. Okay, great. That sounds like a great idea. How are we going to do that? Well, best available science is the basis for developing the policies and regulations, and it must be included in the work. Again, the state says you got to use best available science. You can't just make up ways you're going to protect your critical areas. Best available science is determined by a qualified scientific expert or a team of qualified scientific experts who also assess its applicability to the relevant critical areas. However, a local government may develop and implement alternative means of protecting critical areas from some activities using best management practices or a combination of regulatory and non-regulatory programs. So if the best available science, what this is saying, what the state is saying, is if the best available science is not necessarily going to work in a very specific situation in your city, you have the opportunity, or you have the option, rather, to develop and implement alternative means. You can base that on best management practices and then this combination of regulatory and non-regulatory programs, so you can tailor it better for your city. I'm going to just breeze through this part. You can dig around in your packet and find all of this information. We're basically pointing out in the next few slides what the updated documents are that are considered best available science. So you can see here, these documents for wetland standards, for wetlands information, are from 2023, 2022, and 2021. And if you remember what I said earlier, your SAO was last updated in 2017. So this is new. This is the best available science. This is new information. So we've incorporated that into the proposed changes. Same deal with fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas. However, this one I'm going to dig a little deeper into because it deserves some understanding, and it takes a while to understand it. So there is new guidance from Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife about riparian ecosystems. Basically, the very, very simplified version of it is that right now, everybody's using stream buffer terminology and saying from here to here outside of the stream is a buffer, and you can only do certain things in that buffer. You can adjust the buffer if you do this, you can reduce the buffer if you do this, you need to make the buffer bigger here. It's a little bit malleable. What they're now saying is that needs to be a riparian management zone, RMZ. I'll explain what that is in a second. And they're saying that the RMZ width needs to be based on site potential tree height, which is abbreviated as SPTH 200. So Duvall's existing practice for protecting the riparian areas of fish and wildlife habitat areas is to require stream buffers based on stream types. And this was DFW's recommendation and the state's recommendation for years and years. And so this is based on standard buffers, or landowners could opt into what you have called performance-based buffers there's a big chart in your sensitive areas ordinance in your code that's like a few pages that describes very specific segments of specific streams in your city that says you can have a 50-foot buffer if you replant with native vegetation and you do XYZ. And then in some places, it'll say you can have a 25-foot buffer if you do XYZ. So it's an if then, and it's really based on, or it's really equivalent to a quality versus quantity thing is how I like to think about it. So maybe the quantity, the width of the buffer is not going to be so big, but the quality is going to be better because these performance measures have to be met. And a lot of that, it's my understanding, a lot of that information came from your watershed plan so that your two different codes and regulations talk to each other. So right now, again, I won't go through every little detail, but the blue stuff is what's in your code right now. So for instance, a type NS stream, and I'll tell you what that is in a second, the current buffer is 50 feet, and that's from each side. Performance-based buffers could be smaller or larger. The standard buffer widths that you have are based on scientific studies of the conditions necessary to sustain ecological functions and values to support anadromous and resident fish and presume the existence of a dense native vegetation community in the buffer zone adequate to protect the stream functions and values at the time of the proposed activity. So this is still best available science. DFW recommends replacing that stream buffer terminology and approach and instead apply the RMZs, like I said earlier. They categorize the riparian ecosystem as a priority habitat and thus recommend local jurisdictions designate all riparian areas as critical areas. So previously I said there are 5 critical areas. Now they're saying these RMZs also need to be a critical area by their own merit. A riparian management zone is an area which is regulated for protection, located adjacent to a water body, and with a specified width, which has the potential to provide full riparian functions. So a comment that was received from DFW, stream buffer implies that the area is comparable to a setback from development. In contrast, RMZ reflects the scientific understanding that these areas are critical areas in their own right. So they're saying, like, if you have a house and you have a rear yard setback, you can do stuff in that setback. You could build a small shed back there. You can have your garden. In some cases, maybe you can have a garage or an ADU. There are different things that you can do potentially in that setback. They're equating that with your buffers that are there with the stream buffers right now. And they're saying that an RMZ is a no-build zone. You cannot do that. You can't have little buildings and ADUs and things. So that weird little acronym, SPTH 200, Site Potential Tree Height. So what is it? It's the average maximum height of the tallest dominant trees at 200 years old or older, which is a lot. So if we look at a patch of native forest that's 200 years, we say all the trees are 200 years old, and we say the dominant species appears to be maple. There are tons of maples right here. Then we look at all the heights of the ones that are 200 years old and we average that. Then we get this site potential tree height because that's the potential height of that species at 200 years in a native growth forest. Why? Why are we doing this? 200 years old or older refers to the approximate minimum age of old growth forests. This is how DFW recommends jurisdictions establish RMZ widths. So they're saying you need to establish this width that could potentially produce an old growth forest. Not that it's going to, but that's the condition. So how did we get here? How did they start using this method? In 1993, a group of experts developed a model for determining how to protect riparian areas in forested landscapes. And they found the greatest protection occurred within one site potential tree height 200 and benefits reduced in areas farther away. And they concluded that old growth forest conditions are needed for full riparian ecosystem functions. And I'll add, I don't have it on this slide, but they also say that within 100 feet of the riparian area of the stream, or actually I should say beyond 100 feet, the protections from pollution for the stream diminish greatly. It just drops off after 100 feet. So keep that in mind. So DFW wants this new RMZ, and so they've come up with ways of how to implement it. I've worked at the counter. I've helped applicants before. I always want to know, how are these codes going to play out? Are we going to be able to use these? Are we going to be able to review projects? So DFW has this nifty tool that's based on GIS mapping. So it'll have an aerial, and it has the UGA, so the purple that you see there, or gray, I don't know how your screen's showing it, but shows your city that's within your UGA boundaries. And then you'll see the yellow squiggly lines and the blue squiggly lines. Those are all polygons of soil. So they've brought in soil data, and those polygons show the different soil types, which comes to play in a moment. And then you can see that I've clicked on this image I've clicked on the map in order to get this image, and there's some turquoise. I don't know if you can see it. It's right to the east of the river. So when you click on a polygon in this map, you get this little box with the orange bar at the top. And that tells you the site potential tree height for that area. So for that specific area, the tree name, the dominant species is Doug fir, and the site potential tree height is 215. So in that area, DFW wants the city to have an RMZ that's 215 feet wide from each side of the river, or each side of the water body. Just illustrating what kind of tree species you have in Duvall and the various heights. There are different heights all over the city. So Doug fir could reach 200 feet, 215, 235. My understanding is that the varying heights is based on varying soil conditions. Same with western hemlock and red alder. So if I'm a property owner and I want to do something, what do I have to do to make this happen? Or how do I figure out where I can build my building? So first you have to determine your ecosystem location. Duvall is in the forested ecoregion. There's forested and there's dry land. Duvall is in the forested. And then you verify the stream's location on the site. So a qualified professional goes out and they say, yep, there's a stream, or no, there's no water. Or they say, yes, that's a very important stream because of these reasons or whatever. And those qualified, what makes them qualified is that they're either city appointed or staff from DFW or tribes, ecology, conservation district, etc. So you find somebody who's an expert. The third thing to do, and this is a mouthful, you locate the inner edge of the RMZ using the CMZ and or the OHWM. Basically, all of that means is that you figure out the edge of the water. The ordinary high water mark is the OHWM. So that's the edge of the stream or the edge of the water, basically. So you find that, and then you establish the width of the RMZ based off of that on each side. If the stream goes through the middle of your property, you're going to have this on two sides. So DFW, like I was saying earlier, recommends a minimum 100-foot RMZ for pollution removal used in conjunction with the site potential tree height, which doesn't necessarily apply in Duvall because all of your site potential tree heights are greater than 100 feet. So we can kind of, for a moment, forget about that 100-foot thing. And they're suggesting to use the GIS tool that I showed you and overlay that 100-foot pollution removal, although we're not really going to focus on that. So not really apples to apples, but comparing what you have now with stream buffers to the RMZ, what's this going to look like? So if we go to the bottom of the chart and look at those type NS streams, which is a seasonal non-fish habitat, just easiest to locate on the screen. Currently the buffer is 50 feet, which could be alternative. There could be alternative widths, again, based on that those performance standards. Could be reduced by 15 to 25 feet at least. For an RMZ, for those streams, it's going to be somewhere from 105 feet to 235 feet using the site potential tree height. And it's site specific. So here's an example. So I took your current stream map on what's on the left and compared it to the new DFW mapping system tool that they provided on the right. And you can see sort of in a mint green, there's an oval on each of them. So on the left, that oval is circling the Coquelimance Creek area parallel to Northeast 272nd Place Northeast and 146th and 274th, right there. So for that area, according to the code, there's a minimum 25-foot buffer plus performance measures and allowances for turf and development. Compare that to the riparian management zone recommendations. We get two different tree types. There's the western hemlock at 215 feet and the Doug fir at 235 feet. And the recommendation is that you go with the larger species. So that same bit of water, same piece of water or run of water would need to have an RMZ of 235 feet. So what about urban areas? There's a lot of text on this slide, and I'm not going to read it all. And I normally don't want to put this much text on the side, but my point here is more graphic, that the process in an urban area that's already built up for figuring out your RMZ is really complicated. You have to delineate it. You have to quantify current conditions. You have to identify and prioritize restoration opportunities and projects. You have to deal with infrastructure with an RMZ, replace culverts and remove barriers, revegetate, incorporate additional setbacks, control access, etc. So this is happening all over the state. DFW is commenting on everybody's CAO or SAO update, not just picking on Duvall. Everybody's working on this. Everybody that's updating their codes right now is working on this. So Anacortes is actually, they adopted the site potential tree height 200. I don't know what their trees are or what the heights are for any of these, or I don't remember. And they actually adopted it following a challenge to their original ordinance, which did not include the SPTH 200. Gig Harbor, Thurston County, Walla Walla, they're all using it. SeaTac is not implementing the full recommendations from DFW. Instead, they're requiring a fixed width for RMZs. So they've adopted the RMZ classification and they've said, all right, we're not going to do all these different potential widths. We're going to have one RMZ width and it's based on their site potential tree height and per stream type. Yarrow Point is proposing to allow the use of the 200-year site potential tree height as a reduction from their typical buffers. Bothell, Covington, and Snoqualmie are deploying hybrid systems for determining the RMZs that take place or that take site potential tree height into account, but they provide a standard width, basically changing the approach, which is resulting in increasing the widths of protected lands, but not necessarily increasing to the equivalent of site potential tree height. So they provided a rationale justification that the method results in variable RMZ widths, which is what we saw in Duvall. You could have 205 or 105 to 235, and it could depend from property to property. Two properties next to each other could have different requirements. Two properties across the street from each other could have different requirements. And so these communities said it's too much variety, it's too variable. And then B, they said the widths are far greater than the buffer widths that are currently required. They just weren't comfortable increasing their widths that much. Notably, Bothell is proposing standard RMZ widths throughout the city to provide predictability and certainty for property owners, and DFW has written a letter of support for that approach. Mukilteo proposes using the SPTH 200 for type F fish-bearing streams and a 100-foot buffer for type N streams. So they've fallen back on that typing system and chosen specific numbers. They're saying that they're adopting that the buffers with the 100-foot width eliminate 99% of pollutants. And then, like I was saying earlier, it drops off after that. And they're saying that they want to make sure that they're balancing environmental protection with other city priorities, such as protecting property rights, preserving land to accommodate future population growth and housing, etc. So it really is a balancing act. We've got to think about balancing it with property rights. You know, if the other thing to think about in your code is that currently stream buffers are put in their own, when a new subdivision happens in Duvall, if there's a stream in it, the code says that the stream buffers are put in dedicated tracts that then become the city's property. So if you're going to ask people to increase these widths, it's something to think about. Housing allocations from the state. I know that's top of mind. Economic development, permit timelines and staffing levels, existing environmental goals and policies, got to balance it with that. Best available science and state guidelines. So overall, the proposed code updates that were in your packet, we went for low-hanging fruit first: grammar, linguistic, reference studies, code citations, that kind of stuff. Then there were changes suggested by staff to make it more efficient, a little more usable. Proposing to repeal a section that's repeated somewhere else, just again, working on efficiency. Added in some language to ensure coordination with tribal governments, clarified and allowed activity in all critical areas, which is maintenance of existing non-native vegetation. So a lawn could stay, and that's allowed, but it can't be expanded within sensitive areas and buffers. Minor updates to the wetlands section for classification descriptions. That's based on the new best available science. Changes to buffer widths, which are based on wetland habitat score and category. All of the stuff in the wetland section was based on the latest science. Took out a section on buffer reductions and worked on the wetland ratio. Fish and wildlife habitat areas. So we are proposing to maintain the stream typing and the stream buffers. So keep your performance-based stream width buffer options with some modifications. Eliminate the distinction between salmon and non-salmon bearing streams. That was a recommendation from DFW. So consolidating that into type F, because again, they're saying that the science, they don't need to be separate. According to the science, they can be treated similarly. And then we've proposed adding a new section for RMZs. It would not use the site potential tree height 200, so the variable widths to set the RMZ widths. The RMZ width standard would be 100-foot minimum. Buffer reduction and averaging would only be used where buffers no longer provide ecological functions due to such conditions as existing impervious surfaces and urban development. So if there's already stuff there and the buffer's already degraded, then your code would allow reduction and averaging. Already talked about lawns. Existing uses could be remodeled, reconstructed, and expanded by up to 500 square feet, provided they follow certain criteria. So that's existing uses that are within a critical area or a buffer. And then we've cleaned up your non-conforming uses section so that it's very clear. So the next steps for this, the city actually already issued the SEPA DNS with a 21-day comment period. The comment period, and they like I said much earlier, I said that all the documents were sent out to the various interested parties and agencies. The comment period is up tomorrow, and comments have started trickling in. Sometime in March, we want to bring this to you for a public hearing. Hopefully get a recommendation to send it to council in April, and then hopeful that we'll get adoption in April. I will stop sharing. I can open it back up and reshare if anybody needs me to touch back on a slide, and then open it up for questions if you have any. There's a lot of information.
I might have a question. This is Mala. I know depending on the weather, the streams can change, right, in width or whatever. And I see a lot of homes along the streams. How are we managing, what if the stream extends or, makes it bigger, right? Because the homeowners might have purchased the land at the time, it might not be as wide as now. How do we manage those people? Because we want them to be safe, right? So how do you manage?
So for the purposes of the code and for the regulations, that's where the ordinary high water mark comes in. So the ordinary high water mark is determined by those fluctuations, is my understanding of it, that it looks at, somebody looks at the different fluctuations and figures out almost kind of like the average of where that's going to be. So sometimes, yeah, the stream might be dry and sometimes it might be 30 feet
Wow.
wide. So it looks at the ordinary, where is it typically going to be? And then these buffers or RMZs are measured from that line.
Thank you.
That's a good question.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
That was a lot of information. That's good though.
Yeah, maybe with this information, you can go back and read that memo again in your packet and, you know, kind of, yeah, reinforce the information.
Sounds good. Okay, back to the here.
Is there any action from that presentation for us?
No, it's just a presentation. Yeah, if there was an associated action, that would be under new business.
All right, so moving on to new business.
I have a question.
Sure.
Who are the parties who would challenge Duvall if they did not think we did a correct, made a correct choice or correct? I mean, is it the state? Is it the Department of Wildlife? Who are the parties that would have a problem with anything we implemented with that code changes?
I can answer that if you want, unless staff wants to address it.
Who would sue us?
Yeah, you can go ahead and answer that.
I would say DFW, the state. I don't know if there are other organizations that are active, but there are other organizations that can question what you've done or can challenge it.
Also have the homeowners, right?
Of course, yeah, the homeowners that are affected, but that's affected by it.
Well, yeah, I can add on to that. So with code amendments, and anything that goes, and Troy can correct me if I'm wrong too, but my understanding is anyone who provides public comment during the public comment period. So for example, there is the SEPA public comment period that's open until tomorrow. So anyone who provides comments during that time period then has appeal right. So if they decide to appeal after the decision is made by city council, they do have the right to appeal because they provided comment during the process.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else? Comments, questions? Okay, moving on to new business. This would be the PC Agenda Bill 26-2, co-living housing and residential parking code amendments. Recommendation to the city council.
We do have recommended language in the agenda bill if you want to take a look.
You would have that, right? That's
It's in the packet. You don't have to use the exact language either. You are basically deciding whether or not you want to recommend the code amendments to city council approval. So some statements to that effect, and someone would need to move, and then someone would need and take a vote.
And just to chime in a little bit here, so this is also an opportunity for you as a planning commission to discuss the item together as a body. Earlier, you asked questions for staff, which is fine. And if there's more questions, of course, you can ask staff too. But really, this is also a time for you as commissioners to, if you want, to have a discussion between yourselves, regarding the issue. And also, if you as a body, as a commission, uh, come to the conclusion, hey, we're not ready to make a recommendation yet, you can always move the recommendation to the following meeting. So this is really kind of the point for you guys to decide how you want to move forward and discuss those things amongst yourselves. We can obviously facilitate any questions that may come up in relation to that, but really this is your time.
We can have an opinion. Amazing. Yeah. I think it's great. I mean, any code that comes through and allows developers a little bit of latitude in how they can propose a project with, in this case here where we've got reduced parking, we've got increased density, shared costs of the building are now spread amongst X amount of units versus one unit. It's just a way to make things more affordable. So, in my eyes, I think this is like a really cool thing with all the other regulations and things that developers and investors have to go through, moving trees and going through big environmental studies to figure out if their project is even feasible. This is something that I can see maybe would bring the cost down for an individual unit or somebody to live, in Duvall. So I think it's.
I'll say I'm an unusual member of the planning commission because I don't live in Duvall, but I'm a business owner in Duvall, so I haven't met a lot of you yet, but I own a vegetable farm in the valley. And I have the small grocery store here on Valley Street, a local roots farm store where we sell produce from our farm. And a really big challenge for me, both as a farm owner and as a retail shop owner, is affordable housing. A lot of my employees are individual, like single people. And a lot of them now work right in town. And so I don't think that there's a snowball's chance in hell that housing like this is going to get built in Duvall in the near term. But affordable housing for service sector workers is a thing that I really think is a problem. So I'm excited about this possibility also.
I do have one question. Are there certain number of units that needs to be affordable unit in such development? Are we enforcing that?
So no, not with these code updates. There is a lot of work that is currently being done regarding the comprehensive plan and updates we need to make to provide for affordable housing units. So separately, the work is getting done to examine what the barriers are to affordable housing and to figure out ways to incentivize that. But as a part of this specific code updates, no, we wouldn't be requiring that a certain percentage of the unit be at an affordable rate. But smaller units are in of themselves going to be more affordable typically than something that's larger. So I think this is a good step in the right direction if it were ever to come to Duvall. Okay.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. I think that it's not with the predominant house, most folks who live here aren't able to just Mr. Rogers walk down the street and work at their cute little job at my little store. But there are some folks who work in town and live in town, and I think I see this as a step in the right direction of making that small town work where you live more somewhat, maybe someday more of a reality. Or they can ride their bike down the field to come to work at my farm. You laugh, but I have these people.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, Mr. Chapel, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to share a couple things. I echo what was kind of hinted at by the staff. This is one of those statewide regulations that really isn't going to have a practical effect in Duvall anytime soon. But I did want to share how they are being implemented elsewhere. It's kind of interesting. I don't know if it's going to help or not. We still have to get lenders to catch up to it, but there is a company now that is building houses. They're just regular, everyday houses and selling the bedrooms of the houses as a kind of a condomized living arrangement. I think I have a lot of faith in it in bigger cities. I think it's going to be a good revolution for the mortgage industry. But as far as this goes, as far as voting on this, it's again, I don't see this affecting us for 10 years or more. Yeah, state requires it. Let's do it.
Any other comments or questions?
I think it sounds interesting doing all the reading. It's like, oh, this really does sound kind of cool. Yeah, not probably likely going to happen anytime soon, but cool if it could, or at least giving the opportunity. I thought it was
I
neat.
don't know where everybody, I'm in what they call like the sandwich part of my life where I'm raising my kids and moved in with us. So, like we've got her here, we're looking for a permanent solution for the next 6 months to a year, and something like this would be.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned that because I'm in the same situation. I have kids at home. My parents live in Duvall and they're in a house that's way bigger than the two of them need. And so we talk all the time, like when they stop driving as much, et cetera, like what are options? I know that like this is sort of weird, tiny, et cetera, but I think just the expansion of housing type feels like a positive for folks who, or my 15-year-old who would rather move out right now, but can you move in? Okay.
Yeah, I would like to amend my comment just a little bit. And when I said it doesn't really affect us, it actually may end up affecting things that are already happening now outside of any code that we're doing of people renting a room or things like that. And then we need to be aware of that as well, that could affect people that are already doing something that maybe they didn't have permission to do or didn't ask permission to do, those sort of things.
I have a question not related, but just a miscellaneous change. Like I noticed Lake Washington Technical College moved parking subtext on page 31.
Yes. Yeah, that's just a general cleanup item that is very outdated. Yeah, it's needed to be removed for a long time. So yeah, just cleanup item.
It didn't look.
Yeah, we did.
Okay, well, I move to recommend the proposed code amendments regarding the co-living housing and residential parking to the city council for approval and adoption.
This is Commissioner Chapel, I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The motion passes. Unfinished business. Do we have any? We do not. Then, being that there's no further business, I now adjourn this meeting at 7:43.